Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Kil'jaeden on Mythic in the Tomb of Sargeras.
Yes guys, so unsurprisingly, as this is the last boss in the Tomb of Sargeras, it is the hardest in the instance. However, it has received many nerfs of late, making the fight way more accessible to guilds that have just made it past Avatar. It is a long fight, most kills taking around 12 to 13 minutes, but there is no longer a strict damage requirement, nor is the healing requirement particularly high either. The whole encounter really is just about dealing with the mechanics and progressing step by step. Now before we go any further, let's talk about raid comp.
Now Rupturing Singularity on Mythic is far more potent and it requires you to be very close to the landing orb to avoid being knocked off. When it spawns in the middle of the room, everyone will be knocked off. There are, however, things that will help you out with that. One thing to help you is displacing or blink abilities. If you cast Rage of the Sleeper, Blink, Charge, Heroic Leap, Disengage, Gust of Wind, Displace a Beast, Monk or Lock Teleport, Rocket Jump from Goblins, Draft of Souls Trinket, all of those things, you get the picture. All of that sort of stuff will save you. Now if you don't have any of that at your disposal, you can get a Warlock Gate instead. Also, the tanks will grip the entire raid at certain points in the fight using a new debuff, but we'll talk about that when we get there. You can also use immunities just to flat out immune the knockback effect. Having all these utility spells at your disposal also helps greatly with the Armageddon. These come in frequently and work the same as Heroic, however they deal far more damage. Any that aren't soaked and land on the platform is definitely a wipe, there's no healing cooldown that's going to save you. Having classes that can gain stacks and immune them off helps healers greatly, namely rogues are the best at this. That being said, this is not a requirement by any means. Now the Rupturing Singularity will occur before and after Armageddon at points, so having classes with mobility to go back into the areas to soak makes things much easier. There are 6 small patches to soak and 2 big tank circles to soak. You'll see in some of the footage that we're playing in this video that we're actually using 2 tanks, however, it's definitely worth using 3 nowadays. By using 3 tanks, you can have the 2 tanks dedicated to dealing with KJ and any of the tank adds, whilst this final tank can just deal with one of the big circles for every single Armageddon, and the other big circle you just assign an immunity or a cheap death for. As for the best tanks, we would definitely say it's Druids. Stampeding Roar is particularly useful in this fight, but make sure you bring a single Death Knight tank if possible. The mass grip completely trivializes the dark phase.
Now in terms of healing, you'll definitely want at least 1 Holy Paladin. The tank damage in this encounter is particularly high, but also there are new adds that spawn that need to be healed, and Paladin just so happen to be the best for that job. Shaman cooldowns are absolutely fantastic in this fight and they line up very well at certain points, but also speed and Ankh Totem will help you out a lot. Druids are great for carrying the first intermission where you'll see a large amount of Rupturing Singularities, as well as dealing with the constant ticking damage in the last phase. As for the last healer, you can bring pretty much anything you want. We would however recommend a Priest, ideally Disc. Life Grip's pretty useful, Barrier is especially useful at certain points, as well as well-timed light rafts, so if you've got a Disc, go for it. As for DPS, as we said before, if you can go for classes with mobility and immunities, then you definitely should. So Mage, Hunters, Rogues, Warriors, at least 1 Warlock for the Gateway, and at least 1 Boomkin for the Innovate for the healing adds. Also, Demon Hunters are kind of nice for Darkness, but with all that said, absolutely every single class works here. It's just some classes are going to be far more beneficial than others. Right, anyway, with that all out of the way, let's get straight into it.
Now before you pull the boss, you want to set up 3 markers in the middle of the room, spaced 20 yards apart in a triangle formation. Blink teleports mages exactly 20 yards, so you want to use this to make sure that the markers are at least 20 yards apart, but be sure not to put them much more than 21 to 22 yards apart. On the pull, we Bloodlust and bring the boss in between all 3 markers and face him away from the raid. Shortly afterwards, you'll have your first Armageddon. For all Armageddons, we have a rough preset soaking positions. Tanks take anything near the boss unless assigned to go and soak big circles. Healers take whatever they can safely, and ranged and melee are assigned evenly to particular corners of the room, with more mobile classes prioritizing circles that are further out. This is particularly important on certain Armageddons, however for this one, it's not. Once you soak these Armageddons, you'll have your first DPS adds.
On Mythic, when these adds die, they'll attempt to heal each other if they're within 20 yards of each other. This is why you've set up and spread the markers. Each DPS player that then gets a debuff needs to move to one of these said markers. If you're using bigwigs, it'll actually mark these players with a diamond, triangle or moon, if this particular setting has been enabled within the mod by your raid leader. Once the adds are spawned, immediately you want all your DPS to swap to them and begin to kill off the front too, ideally killing them both at the same time. You're probably going to need to assign and split your DPS evenly in order to achieve that. Now, whenever these ads die on Mythic, the original player that spawned them will actually get a new debuff. While under the effects of this debuff, the player will continually fire out orbs in all directions. If a player is hit by one of these orbs, they'll take a huge spike of damage, also splashing more damage onto nearby players, and then finally be shot up into the air. Now, taking this damage if you're on full health, you're probably going to survive, but it really isn't a good idea. You must avoid the orbs at all costs. So what's the best way of dealing with them? So just before both ads die at the front, the original players need to be outside of the raid. The right hand player goes to the top right hand corner. When his ad dies, he just runs in a straight line towards the bottom right hand corner. The left player goes to the center left hand side of the room, and when his ad dies, he runs in a straight line towards the top left corner. While moving, it's absolutely vital that you do not use any movement speed increases, or you'll actually be hit by your own orbs as you spawn them, which will pretty much kill you. While this is all happening, the raid will be taking a large amount of damage, of course, from the previous cast of the now dead ads, as well as the ad that is still alive at the back. And this includes the people that are kiting the orbs. They're going to be taking this damage as well as taking even more damage from the debuff. And they're going to be out of range of your healers, so this is where your paladin kicks in. If you chain Rule of Law for 20 seconds, you can easily cover both players as they run with their orbs. And if that isn't good enough, you can make it even safer by using things like Kil'jaeden's Trinket on them, or you can even use external cooldowns. As for the damage that is going on in the raid, you can cover that by using literally every single healing CD that you have, apart from one output CD that you'll need to save later on for the intermission. It is completely overkill, but really you can do it. You don't need to save them for any other point. As for dodging the orbs that are coming towards the raid, we can't actually give you that much advice. It's something that you just sort of pick up after a couple of pulls. You just have to avoid the orbs. If the debuff players run exactly how we've just explained, you'll just notice corridors that you can easily move down to avoid both sets. You've just got to use your eyes. One thing that will help you, however, is if you change your particle density and your graphic options to low, it'll be significantly easier to see the orbs. They have so many unnecessary spell effects on them that just makes them really difficult to judge otherwise. Now, once you've dealt with the first two orb sets, it's now time to deal with the final one. The DPS player that spawned that particular ad needs to move over towards the left hand side of the room and just completely replicates what the first left hand side player did. He needs to go to the center of the platform on the left hand side and simply move up into the top left corner. You've got to make sure that you don't rush this entire sequence, because if you do it too fast, there's just going to be orbs absolutely everywhere. Potentially you're going to kill that last DPS. He's not going to have enough room to just move up. However, if you're too slow, you're going to have to deal with a rupturing singularity at the exact same time, which really isn't ideal.
Now, this singularity will spawn in any of the four corners. Make sure you move towards it, or you have something to prevent yourself from being knocked off. Immediately afterwards, you'll have the next Armageddon and the tank ad. Here comes the most important part of phase 1. The next rupturing singularity will spawn and detonate within 20 seconds or so, and this one spawns in the middle of the room. If your damage is high enough and you think you can consistently kill the tank ad before the singularity, then do so. When the tank ad dies, it will debuff the tank with a hard-hitting dot. When this is dispelled, it will grip all players, including the debuff tank, to the location of where the debuff was dispelled off the tank. Do this in midair after the singularity is landed, and it will save your entire raid. The likelihood you'll make this damage requirement on a first kill isn't particularly high, so what you can do instead is use a gateway or a displacing ability. To prevent people from not hitting it in time or clicking a player instead of the gateway, we have some tools to help you. Using the macro /focus mouse over, you can set up the gateway as a focus frame, and in the keybind options, you can bind interactive mouse over. So as the singularity spawns, you want to use your macro to put the gateway as your focus, and 0.5 seconds or lower before the singularity lands, you want to mouse over your focus frame and then hit your interact bind. Any time above 0.5 seconds and you're going too early and you're likely to be knocked off the platform. We have a singularity weaker in the description that will accurately show you the time before it lands. Now if you decide to gateway instead, you are of course going to have that tank ad up. By now he would have already done one whale, but he's about to do another. This one is going to do far more damage and in a bigger circle. We have our tank responsible for the ad to bring it out of the raid, and he is life grip the moment the whale is cast. This doesn't save his life, but it does prevent a big burst of damage from hitting him, potentially also saving tank CDs. From this point we hold damage on the ad until the next singularity, which happens just as the last Armageddon spawns. Once the singularity lands, we dispel the debuff off the tank and get gripped to his location, and we transition into the first intermission.
Like in Heroic, the boss will fly away and now you'll just have to simply deal with mechanics until he returns back to the platform. and immediately you'll have an Armageddon with bursting dread flames. You just need to make sure you soak the puddles and spread if you have bursting, ideally away from people soaking, and then afterwards you'll have a rupturing singularity. At this point we use a roar. The reason behind this is that if you're a class that has absolutely no movement speed increase, and you've soaked an Armageddon on the other side of the room in relation to the singularity, you cannot make it back in time, you'll simply just be knocked off. With a roar, it covers it. As this first rupturing singularity spawns, you'll have another one spawn randomly within the 3 remaining corners. You need to make sure that you position yourself so you're knocked towards that location, otherwise again you're going to fall off. On the second rupturing singularity, you simply just want to be knocked into the middle of the room. When we land, we immediately use a speed totem on top of the raid, and then move towards the next singularity that spawns. Simultaneously, you'll have Focused Dread Flame. On our first kills, we used tanks and rogues to soak the beam every single time in all phases, but since then we've used 3 tanks and 2 to 3 random melee DPS, so you can be quite flexible when it comes down to who's actually assigned to stand in the beam. Essentially, as long as you have 6 people, the target should be safe. Once you've dealt with the beam and you've now moved over into the corner, you're going to have 4 singularity explosions in a row. They'll spawn randomly within each of the corners of the room, however in whatever sequence you get, they'll never spawn in the same place more than once. Just be very quick to identify where you must stand so you're knocked in the right direction. And it's during these 4 knockbacks that we save the output CD from phase 1, and that just so happens to be a trank for us. Once you've landed after the 4th hit, you'll have Armageddon and the beam at the exact same time. The player that's targeted by the beam should attempt to make it so people that are soaking the Armageddon aren't comboed with a beam, whilst also not soaking the Armageddon themselves unless they have a large CD to do so. Afterwards, you'll have 2 more singularities back to back. We use a roar again at this point because we've just come out of an Armageddon, and once the second singularity is hit, you'll have one last set of bursting dread flames, and then you're into phase 2.
The first thing to deal with in this phase is an Armageddon, however a singularity on a random corner will land shortly after you soak. It is vital to have players that cannot stay on the platform ignore the Armageddon and instead run immediately towards the singularity, the same with your healers. Meanwhile, players that can stay on the platform using mobility spells must go and soak. This is why setting up who soaks what area before you pull the boss is so useful. You will need to reuse this rule later on in the fight. Now as the healers move over, they'll get a new debuff, and this debuff will also go on 1 random DPS in the raid. This debuff will expire a few seconds after you land from the knockback and you'll spawn some adds. Make sure that you're stacked loosely so that all adds are within close proximity of one another. Now simultaneously you'll have your Focused Dread Flame at the same time. Make sure the targeted player is not faced towards the healers. Now back to these healing adds. The moment they spawn, they'll stand still and begin a long channel. Once this channel is completed, they'll explode, one-shotting your raid. However, if you heal them, they'll disappear into a puddle of silencing shit on the ground and deal a small burst of damage to the raid. They'll also give your healers a debuff that gives them 10% of their mana back over 5 seconds. So what is the best way of dealing with them? You want to have your paladin run Aura of Sacrifice, Holy Avenger, and Sanctified Wrath, and if you want to go even further, you can use the Avenging Wrath belt, and to help even more, you want to use Valen's Trinket. You want to cast your artifact as you land, have a boomkin innovate you for the casting speed, pop all your cooldowns and just go ham on them. Other healers can assist you with ground effects and hots, but ultimately your paladin should do most of the work. If you need it, beacons can also be applied on these adds which will speed them up significantly, but it is pretty overkill. We leave it on the tanks just for safety. As the adds are being topped off and small bursts of damage are going out onto the raid, we use another CD such as a trank or a hymn to cover it. Now the adds sadly do not show on normal raid frames or even boss frames. We personally use a weak aura that simply displays their health, and we just manually click on each of these adds. You can however set up targeting macros for at least 4 of the adds, as they'll always have the name of the healer that they came out of. So as an example, /target Numtaz's Hopeless Reflection would target this particular healing ad every single time. As the 5th ad comes out of a random DPS player is going to be different every single time, so setting up a macro for this person is pretty pointless. Now the ad's debuff that is placed onto the healers doesn't stack, meaning if you explode all 5 at the exact same time, you're still only going to get 10% of your mana back, so staggering them is the best practice if you need mana. However, after they spawn, an Armageddon will land around 18 seconds later. If you have adds being topped during this Armageddon, you're potentially looking at combos with people taking too much damage and potentially dying. We recommend topping up the adds before this Armageddon, it just makes things far cleaner.
After you've dealt with the Armageddon, you'll then have your next tank ad. You'll want all your DPS to swap to it and just kill it off. The next singularity doesn't spawn in the middle, but you have ample time to kill this ad before the singularity comes in, and the tank debuff isn't needed for any other point, so you might as well just kill this ad off now while you can. And as the singularity lands, you'll also have a beam at the exact same time. Afterwards, you'll get another Armageddon, followed up by a bursting Dreadflame, followed by yet another tank ad, and while this tank ad is up, you'll have a beam and then an Armageddon, followed up by a singularity that spawns in the middle of the room. You need to make sure that the tank ad dies before it lands, and use either a roar or place a speed totem on the tank just before you dispel. The reason for this is because as you are knocked back by the singularity, you'll have bursting Dreadflame at the exact same time. Having the speed increase already down allows people to spread far quicker once they've been gripped from the dispel. And after you've got past this point, this is where you get to the hardest part of the phase. You'll now get DPS ads and Armageddon at the exact same time. The DPS debuffs need to go on top of their marker, meanwhile people must go and soak. However, it's incredibly important here that people don't get extra stacks of Armageddon, so if you're already on 1 or 2 stacks, it's very important that you don't get more. The amount of raid damage that comes in at this point is really difficult, and it's hard to heal up because the Paladin cannot use any of his cooldowns as he needs to save every single one of them for the healing ads that are coming up again soon. This means that the raid of course is going to be missing a lot of CDs, so using personals to compensate for that is a really good idea. You want to deal with the front 2 ads just like you did in phase 1, however for the last ad, we simply just sacrifice the player. As the ads appear, you'll also have Fell Claws. The player at the back of the triangle simply just places his ad and then stands right in front of the boss with an Ankh totem underneath his feet. As long as he remains dead until his ad dies, absolutely no orb spawn whatsoever. And as that last DPS ad is dying, you're going to be having bursting Dreadflames at the exact same time, and it's likely that you're probably still going to have some orbs left over from the first 2 ads. The Dreadflame players really need to make sure they move away from the raid, and healers you need to keep an eye on them and make sure they're spot healed. To make this bit a little bit safer, we use a rally here. As soon as the bursting is gone, the dead player can then accept the res from the totem, and then immediately you'll have another Armageddon. Once you've managed to soak past this point and everyone's still alive, you can take 10 seconds just to have a little breather, and then you'll have your next rupturing singularity, and this is where you'll have your next set of healing ads. Now if you can top these healing ads really quick, it's possible that you might actually be able to transition the boss at this point. On our more recent kills we've been doing this, but for a first kill it's kind of unlikely. But if you do decide to make the transition, it's important that the healing ads are not placed within the top right hand corner of the room, and if they are in the top right hand corner, because that's where you've been knocked back, try and place the puddles as close to the edge as possible, because you're going to need this space in a minute. Now if you don't have the damage to make that transition, then you're going to have to deal with another Armageddon. Shortly afterwards you'll have another beam, then you'll have a tank ad with yet another Armageddon, and you want this ad to die just before the next singularity lands, which again is also coupled with a beam. And this is the very latest point that you'll want to transition.
Now as you transition, you want to move the boss as far as you can into the top rightmost corner. When Deceiver's Veil is cast, the boss will spawn the Darkness ads within a certain distance randomly around himself. With the boss in the corner, this causes them to be far more stacked than if the boss is in the middle of the room, and this exact same rule applies to when Illidan spawns. By having the healing ad puddles in this particular area, it can be limiting on space. This is why, as Loz said, it's very important to put them to the side if you happen to land in this area from the previous knockback. Now the Darkness phase is the exact same as Heroic, however you are going to have some rupturing singularities spawning. They do however have a set pattern. You'll have one in the top right corner first, this is why you start in this area. It will then be in the bottom right, then the bottom left, and then the top left. After that, we have absolutely no idea, we've never had the phase go on that long, and you really shouldn't either. If you're quick enough, you only actually have to deal with the first knockback from the top right. Just before Deceiver's Veil cast has finished, have your Death Knight tank mass grip all of the ads. You want to immediately find Illidan by having your raids spread out in an arc around the boss. You find him, everyone runs over, and just before the ads finish their cast, land a long stun on them. You can now safely AoE them all down and end the phase before really it's even started. As the singularity lands, you can either stand near it and be knocked into the middle of the room, or if you know that there's going to be another knockback coming, you can get knocked into the bottom right. Or you can use the gateway set up by the Warlock or any sort of mobility spells, but you really don't want to be using any immunities, they're better saved for the last phase. Now if you do not have a mass grip, then you're kind of instead forced to go through this phase as it's meant to be. We don't have any footage of this apart from our initial kill, where singularities are from random places and grips don't work. But as you can see, it gives you an idea of how you can be clever and use a gateway on a single knockback, and then something else including immunities for the next. It is still possible to kill all of the ads before the third knockback comes in. but even if the knockback does come, you do know where it's going to be coming from. As soon as the phase is over, you want to all stack up behind the boss so the healers can top you up. As the Dauntless cast goes off, we make sure that we have a Spirit Link totem down as a minimum. If you can add a Darkness from your Demon Hunter, or a Barrier from your Disc Priest on top of that, it only makes it cleaner.
Now this final phase is actually one of the easier phases. It's very similar to Heroic, however there are a couple of changes that make it slightly more difficult. Now the first thing to talk about is the rifts. On Mythic they have a health bar. Each time they soak up a fire patch or whenever they eat the bolts from the Darkness of Thousand Souls cast, they take damage. To track the health of the rifts, we've included a weak aura below. You should find it useful. You need to track the rift's health, otherwise the rift might not be able to soak all the bolts from one of the Darkness casts, and a random person in your raid might just flat out get one shot. Each bolt from the cast deals 4% damage to the rift, so if the rift is on 80% health, it can soak all 20 people. But even if you've kited all the orbs perfectly so the rift eats as little fire as possible, it's very unlikely that the rift is going to be on 80% every single time this ability is cast, so you're going to need to have a few people stand out depending on the health of the rift. We recommend for every single cast that you have your tanks stand out. Then if you need more players to stand out for whatever reason, then choose classes that have like a 20% damage reduction or higher. So paladins are pretty good with divine protection. Druids can use bear form and still survive. There's quite a lot of different classes that can do different things. Essentially choose people that don't have other jobs within this last phase. You should only ever have to deal with a cast maybe 2 times, perhaps 3 on a slow kill. So it's not too difficult to assign people on the fly. As for the flame orbs, you'll want to kite them for at least 6 seconds to ensure that they're as small as possible, as of course, the smaller they are, the less damage the rift takes. The best classes to kite these are definitely mages. They can blink around with them. Rogues are fantastic as well, they can sprint and shadow step, and hunters are also good with disengage. But the reason why these 3 classes are so good in particular is because they also have immunities. When you're kiting the flame orbs, you'll also have obelisk explosions at the exact same time at certain points. So having an immunity at your disposal allows you to kite these perfectly while completely ignoring the obelisks.
On Mythic, there are more obelisks to dodge, and they pretty much one-shot. As the fight goes on, more and more of these obelisks will spawn, and towards the end, depending on how long the fight goes on for you, you may have up to 8 of them active. We designate 2 players to finding safe spots and marking them with wild markers for the raid to stack on before they explode. These players should really not worry about dealing damage, they should focus all of their effort into finding these safe spots. Tanks can use these safe spots as well, just not all of the time, as there are overlaps where fell claws are active. In these situations, the tanks need to find their own safe spot, which isn't particularly easy as your view is limited by the boss, and the 2 players can help the tanks try and find an additional safe spot, but we never rely on it. Ultimately, if you cannot find a safe spot as a tank, you can just take a single hit, providing you have something else to keep you on the platform. You may need to cool down the hit based on your class and your gear, but ultimately, you should look at avoiding taking any damage from them whatsoever. Now the flame orb spawn and obelisk explosion don't necessarily overlap, but every 3rd flame orb will spawn 4 seconds or so before you must stack up in the safe spot. Make sure you bait this orb away from the safe spot and then move to the safe area once the orb is spawned. You want to assign immune classes to kite this baited orb on these particular overlaps. And as for the beam in this phase, we just use the same 6 people like in the previous phases. And honestly, that's all you need to know in this fight.
So pretty much all you need to do is avoid the obelisks, you need to kite the orb as well as you possibly can, make sure you're tracking the rift health, soak the beams, place the bursting dread flames outside the raid, bloodlust as soon as it comes back up whenever it suits you, whenever your CDs are available, and kill the boss.
Yep, it's really that simple.
Yeah, the last phase really is that simple. But thank you very much for watching, guys. If this guide helped you out, then please do drop us down a like. It helps us out. Also, if you'd like to know more about this encounter or any of the other encounters in the Tomb of Sargeras, then do check out our write-up over on Wowhead. The link for that is in the description. And as always, thank you very much to all the people that have supported us over on Patreon throughout the Tomb of Sargeras. You guys are absolutely fantastic. We shall be seeing you all in the next tier with more guides and more previews are on the way.
Thanks for watching, guys.
Thanks for watching.